Today is day 313 of the October 7th war and the Hamas hostage crisis. Hamas keeps firing rockets at civilians and Israel, again from inside a humanitarian safe zone. Because Hamas's plan has always relied on this. When Israel tries to stop Hamas firing rockets at its people, some attack Israel for supposedly violating humanitarian protections. And let's be clear, Israel is claiming Hamas fired from a humanitarian zone. Hamas posted a video of setting up and firing rockets at Tel Aviv from inside a tent in a humanitarian zone. And Hamas's murderous rocketeers are dressed up as civilians in t-shirts and jeans. For Hamas, military fatigues are only for looking tough, for propaganda videos. Think about it. Hamas films explicit evidence of their war crimes and then puts it online. For anyone unsure, it is a war crime to fire at civilian targets like the city of Tel Aviv. It is a war crime to fire from among civilians. It is a war crime to attack while dressed as civilians. These rockets are a reminder that Hamas is a ticking time bomb. Anytime they can, Hamas will blow up people in Israel and people in Gaza, especially while fighting from behind Gazan children. And why not? Hamas filmed and posted their massacre and abduction on October 7th. Hamas filmed and posted and promised to do it again and again and again and again, and some still uncritically repeat Hamas's propaganda while casting doubt on Israel's side. So why wouldn't Hamas fire from inside safe zones? The UN is basically telling it to do that. When Israel is forced to strike in a humanitarian zone, remember that Hamas murderers are firing at people in Israel from within the shelters. One of the Hamas rockets aimed at murdering innocents in Israel fell short and impacted in Gaza. Hamas relies on their international cheerleaders to grant them immunity to inhumanely violate humanitarian protections, to threaten innocents in Israel while endangering innocents in Gaza. Israel is not fighting to avenge the last October 7th. It's fighting to prevent the next October 7th. And some things are worth fighting for. Stopping a terrorist army an hour's drive away from Tel Aviv from being able to fire rockets at our cities at will is one of those things. Because Hamas is still trying to murder innocent people in Israel. Hamas is still holding 115 hostages in its terror dungeons. Iran is blackmailing Israel to try to save Hamas. Here's the deal. Hamas is refusing to negotiate to free the hostages. Hamas is refusing to negotiate a ceasefire and says it won't attend a US-led ceasefire summit in Cairo tomorrow. Meanwhile, Hamas's patrons in the Islamic Republic are threatening to attack Israel if there is no ceasefire. They're trying to blackmail Israel into leaving Hamas free to perpetrate more October 7th massacres again and again. The Iranian regime has been attacking Israelis on 7 fronts since October 7th. Now Iran is blackmailing Israel to try to save Hamas. Iran hasn't been able to destroy Israel, so it's trying to force Israel to commit suicide. But Israel cannot return to October 6th. It cannot turn to a world in which Hamas can invade and take hostages at will. Hamas must release the hostages, and we need international pressure on Hamas and its backers, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran, to let them go now. And the war that Hamas started on October 7th must end with the 3 Ds. The destruction of Hamas, the demilitarization of Gaza, and the de-radicalization of Palestinian society. Or else there will be a next time, and it will be worse. And it will be worse because Hamas will think that the world will save it from the wars that it starts. Iran says it rejects the calls by the Americans, the British, the French, the Germans, and the Italians not to attack Israel in an act of aggression. In the meanwhile, the US has okayed a $20 billion arms deal to Israel, including fighter jets. And Israel's allies have positioned significant military assets in the region. Israel does not want war with Iran. But Iran is already fighting a regional war against Israel on 7 fronts. Israel will not today allow Iran what it and its proxy armies need to murder more people in Israel tomorrow. If Iran insists on attacking Israel in an unprovoked act of aggression, Israel will do what it must to defend its people, knowing that the free world stands behind our right to defend ourselves. And the West must continue to stand with Israel against Iran's aggression and against attacks by its proxy armies on 7 fronts. For all those asking what you can do to help, you'll find links to our JGive campaign across social media. Those donations help us so much in helping to get the word out. As always, please like, subscribe to help us reach a wider audience and keep growing our platforms. We're eyeing hitting 20,000 on Instagram, and we're not too far off. We'll take some questions now from audience watching live on social media. Please.
Our first question today comes from Chucky KY on Instagram, who asks, How can they still fire rockets? Why aren't they destroyed yet?
Hamas's ability to fire rockets at Israeli cities has been massively downgraded. In the early hours of the war, they fired thousands of rockets as they were conducting the October 7th massacre. They don't have that ability anymore. Israel allegedly eliminated arch-terrorist Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and Hamas did not respond with a rocket barrage at Israeli cities, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. Israel has degraded Hamas's military capabilities by doing the following: by destroying the weapons silos and confiscating their weapons, by destroying Hamas's weapon production facilities above ground and below ground, and critically, by cutting off Hamas's smuggling routes from Egypt along the Philadelphia corridor, the border next to Rafah, so it cannot import those missiles. And here's why it's so important that when this war ends, with the return of all the hostages, Hamas not be able to regroup and rearm, or it will continue to get those rockets with which it has been raining hellfire on Israeli cities for the last 20 years. Hamas is still a ticking time bomb. Israel is fighting not out of anger at what Hamas did on October 7th, but to stop terrorists from attacking our cities and from perpetrating massacres like they did on October 7th. And it's crucial to remind everyone that even though Hamas's military machine has been massively degrading, it is still a terrorist army that is fighting as a guerrilla force. And this war has to end with Hamas no longer able to fire rockets at Israeli cities. No country in the world would put up with it, and Israel is done putting up with it too.
Our next question comes from Lolly Schwartz on Instagram, who asks, Did Israel move the goalposts, re the ceasefire deal? How close are we really?
Israel's official position is that it has not made any changes to the original ceasefire proposal. It's made only certain clarifications. For example, the question of whether terrorists can move back into northern Gaza. The original ceasefire proposal from May says that armed militants, armed terrorists, cannot move back into Gaza City. Why does Israel want to stop terrorists moving into Gaza City? Because if they do that, they will regroup and rearm just meters away from Sderot. So Israel is now making certain clarifications, such as the mechanism to ensure that terrorists can't go up north, not relying on a wink and a handshake with Hamas, a promise that it won't go back into Gaza City, an ability for Israeli soldiers to inspect the people who are going up north. Meanwhile, as Israel's Prime Minister's office has said, Hamas has made dozens of changes to the text. And that's because at the moment Hamas is not interested in a ceasefire at all. Hamas does not want to let the hostages go. Every day that this war drags on is a benefit for Hamas, not despite civilian suffering, but because civilians are suffering. Because that is part of Hamas's strategy, to generate human suffering, real and imagined, to get pressure on Israel to leave it alone. And so as we go into these negotiations tomorrow, to which Hamas is saying it will not attend, it's not even going to take part in those talks, we need you to put pressure on your leaders, to put pressure on Hamas and its backers, you know them by now, Qatar, Turkey and Iran, to let the hostages go. And to give Hamas a reason to let them go, they need to repeat the demand that Hamas release those hostages unilaterally and unconditionally, and whatever agreement lets the hostages out has to make sure that Hamas is not able to regroup and rearm, because then it will do another October 7th, and it will take more hostages, and we will be in the exact same boat all over again.
Our next question comes from Malcolm F on Instagram, who asks, The Australian government wants to issue visas to Gazans. How could Australia let in people, most of whom we know are indoctrinated, who participated on October 7th and who worked for UNRWA, aka Hamas, and are anti-West?
You'd have to ask the Australian government or the Australian Citizen Spokespersons Office. I'm afraid I really can't explain what Canberra might be thinking. Perhaps Asher Westrop Evans, who previously had a position as an Australian government spokesman and is now part of the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office and will be presenting the briefing tomorrow, might have some ideas. But really, I don't know. I understand the impulse among certain countries to want to give protection for people fleeing a war zone. It's a noble humanitarian impulse. But just look at opinion polls in Gaza. Most people think the October 7th massacre was the correct decision by their government, Hamas. Despite all the suffering, they think that it was worth it for 24 hours of raping and murdering. Gaza has a severe extremism problem. An extremism problem funded by Western countries. Because that drive to jihad has been taught in UN schools, in UNRWA schools. And so if countries want to take in refugees, I think that's very noble, but they need to be absolutely aware of the extremism problem inside Gaza and not be naive about that at all.
Our next question comes from Itai on Instagram, who asks, Eylon, what do you feel after watching the October 7th massacre video?
Itai, thank you for your question. For those who don't know what Itai is referring to, last week I watched the 10-minute clip of atrocities from October 7th that was screened to the judges at the ICJ. It was screened to help them understand what Hamas did on October 7th, triggering this war, and the sort of massacre that it is threatening to do again and again, and therefore Israel is fighting to prevent. Israel is not publicly releasing the footage, although you may remember some of the footage from October 7th. It's not releasing it out of respect for the victims' families. But in this video, which is on my YouTube channel, I describe what I saw. For half an hour, as the light flickers in my face, I react to the video of the atrocities. These are the worst things I have ever seen. Corpses burned to a cinder, to a coal, horrific mutilations, including in people's genital areas, evidence of widespread sexual abuse, people who were burned alive, people who were gagged and bound before they were burned alive. We've been speaking for 10 months about the atrocities of October 7th. It made me realize that this was not only a brutal massacre, it was a sadistic massacre. It was a massacre in which Hamas terrorists deliberately sought to murder as many people in the most painful way that they could, and they did so gleefully. And it was a reminder of why Israel is fighting and what it is working to prevent. And I would encourage all of you to go to my YouTube channel and watch the reaction video to the October 7th atrocity footage to remind you how this war started. And that since then Hamas has spent every day denying that it performed the atrocities that it recorded itself filming, and promising to do again and again until all of us are dead.
Our next question comes from Bambusera on Instagram, who asks, does the Citizen Spokespersons Office distribute these briefings to Western mass media outlets? If not, why not? They need some balance to Al Jazeera and other mouthpieces of radical Islam.
We are doing our best to speak directly to the international media. I was on Talk TV in Britain just this morning. I'm going to hop off this and go straight on Fox News, so you're invited to join me at 4 o'clock Israel time. We are working to get our other citizen spokespeople on the international media as well, and to engage with them to make sure that Israel's voice and Israel's message is heard loud and clear. We're going to do that fight on traditional media, but we need you to do it as well. We are doing these briefings not so that you watch them and go, huh, that was interesting, but so you take this information and lead the fight in your own communities. If you hear someone, a radio presenter, talking nonsense about Israel, we want to give you the words at the tip of your tongue to have the confidence to call them up and say, you're talking nonsense, here are the facts. It's so important that you not only rely on a team of citizen spokespeople, but you become citizen spokespeople yourself and have the words and the information and the strategic messaging that you need to fight Israel's corner in media outlets that you too can get into. That's the mission we believe in, and we're so glad that you're part of it.
Our next question comes from YouTube from Joanne, who asks, do you have any information about the tragic reports of twins killed in Gaza?
Joanne, I've seen those horrific reports about the twins who were reportedly killed in Gaza. It is really heartbreaking, the amount of civilian suffering as a result of Hamas's decision to declare this war and fight it from inside civilian areas. At the moment, I think details are still thin. I saw a report with the infant's father who said that he himself doesn't know exactly what happens. He says his house was hit by a shell. We don't know the circumstances of that. The IDF is looking into it. We do know that Hamas fights from inside civilian buildings, from homes, from schools, from hospitals, and it's possible that Hamas was operating inside or around where these infants were reportedly killed. But I'm afraid we don't have information at the moment, and it's important not to speculate and to wait to get all the facts.
And our last question today comes from Myriad OMG on Instagram, who asks, how's the Israeli spokesperson office team doing? Are you guys finding the time to heal and talk to a professional for some help? We appreciate what you're doing.
Therapy, we're talking to you. The citizen spokesperson team is full of a lot of fighting spirit. We are over 10 months into this horrible war that has turned our lives upside down. And we're all filled with a great sense of conviction about why Israel needs to win this war that was declared against it. We understand what is at stake if Israel does not win this war, and that's why we're full of commitment to continue fighting and to continue empowering you, our supporters around the world, to continue fighting as well. I'll say this about the mood in Israel in general. It's been over a week that our TV screens have been stuck with a stripe saying, Israel bracing for imminent Iranian missile attack. But no one here is panicking, no one here is looting, no one is hiding or sheltering in place at home. People are getting on with their ordinary lives. And they know that if a siren starts and there is an emergency, we will follow the instructions of the Home Front Command, we will seek shelter, and we'll do what we have to do to keep safe. But we're not letting Iran's threats of a direct missile attack get us down. We're finding ways to keep up our spirits. The atmosphere in the office is good. We're making jokes, some dark jokes. It's a way to cope. Humor is a coping mechanism. And I would advise everyone who's having trouble in these times, try to find a way to have a chuckle. Sometimes it can feel wrong, but it is a coping mechanism and it's important to let off pressure. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We need everyone to conserve their energies and keep sane. Okay, that's all we have time for today. We will be back tomorrow, 3 o'clock Israel time, 8 a.m. Eastern on all the social media platforms with a citizen spokesman, Asher Westrop Evans. As always, follow us on all the social media platforms. If you're watching on Twitter, give us a follow on Instagram now. Instagram, give us a follow on YouTube. And please do me a favor, share the link with one friend and ask them to follow as a special favor so we can get the message out to the whole wide world. Thank you very much, everyone. Keep safe.